Shalom, everybody. I was doing some thinking today about some conversations I've had in the last week, and actually in the last year, American year 2020 up into 2021. I think I've had more conversations about the whole Paul is a false apostle thing in the last year and a half than I have in the last 5 to 10 years. It's sad, very sad that people are going that route. But one of the things that keeps coming up is this. People say, but Matthew, there are thousands, millions, one guy told me 2.5 billion Christians who use Paul to do away with the law. So they'll quote passages that Paul wrote. They'll use those to do away with the Torah. So my fellow Torah observant friends, Torah pursuant friends, whatever you want to call yourself, those that believe the Torah is valid for today. If I asked you, when you talk to somebody about the dietary laws or the fact that you don't eat pork or shellfish, what's the first verse that everybody goes to? I'll give you a second to answer. And I'm pretty sure you're going to agree with me that it wasn't a verse written by the Apostle Paul. Rather, it was a text that was written by Luke, and the text was specifically about Apostle Peter in Acts chapter 10. I can't tell you how many times that I've had conversations about the dietary laws, or people find out that I don't eat pork, and they say, but what about the sheet that was let down to Peter? What are you going to do with that, Matthew? The sheet. The second verse, if I had to ask you, what's the second passage or text that is gone to, what would you say? Give you a second. How about Mark chapter 7? Traditionally said to be written by Mark. And it is about our Master and Savior, Yeshua of Nazareth, where he has a discussion with the Pharisees about hand washing. And there's a text that is translated by some translations right in there. I think it's Mark 7:19. Thus he declared all foods clean. That's the second most famous verse that I've had people show to me. Now there is a verse that Paul writes that people go to. It's 1 Timothy chapter 4. I think it's like verses 1 through 4, 1 through 5, something like that. But that's definitely not the primary verse. Acts 10 is the primary, and I would say Mark 7 is the secondary. So my point here is this. You can't judge a man by how people treat his writings. No more than if somebody bought a brand new Apple computer and never operated one and didn't know how to operate it, and they didn't read the instruction manual, and then they called you that night and said, hey, this thing's broke and it's brand new, and you're like, hey, you just bought the computer, how can it be broke? You go over there and you're familiar with the product and it cranks right up and you can use it and there's no problem. You can't judge the product by the person that doesn't know how to use the product. I'm going to move here away from that sun. It's bothering me. So the point is, if you're going to say that Paul is a false apostle because people use, millions of people, let's say, use his writings to do away with the Torah, by that logic, you're going to also have to say that Peter is a false apostle because people use Acts chapter 10 as the primary verse to do away with the dietary laws. And if you're consistent, you're going to have to say that Yeshua is a false Messiah because millions of people use Mark 7 to do away with the dietary laws. Anti-Paulists are going to say, but we can explain Mark 7, we can explain Acts chapter 10. Those are easy to explain. And I would rebut, I can explain 1 Timothy 4. I can explain Galatians 3. I can explain Romans 3, 4, and 5. It's not difficult. I can explain 1 Corinthians 7. So we just have a bad form of argumentation here. Just because somebody misuses a text doesn't mean there's not a proper use of that text.